Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that everything you own legally belongs to someone else. Your house, your clothes, your money, even your own body. You cannot quit your job because you don't have one. You cannot leave because your legs belong to someone else. If you have children, they are not really your children anymore. They can be sold, separated from you, or inherited like furniture. Not because you committed a crime, not because you lost a war yesterday, simply because in the eyes of society, you are property. For thousands of years, millions of people lived exactly like that. Not in one civilization, not in one empire, almost everywhere. The Sumerians, the Romans, ancient kingdoms in Africa, the Vikings, the Aztecs, dynasties in China, kingdoms in India, civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years somehow reached the same astonishing conclusion. A human being could own another human being. But why? How does a species capable of love, empathy, friendship, and cooperation create one of history's cruelest institutions? The answer begins with a surprising fact. For almost all of human history, slavery probably didn't exist. Not because early humans were kinder, because it simply wasn't practical. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Agriculture appeared only around 10,000 years ago. That means for more than 95% of our existence, people lived as hunter-gatherers, small groups, usually between 50 and 150 people. They owned almost nothing. Everything they possessed had to be carried on their backs. There were no cities, no farms, no warehouses, no banks, no permanent homes. If food disappeared, everyone moved. If the weather changed, everyone moved. If conflict appeared, people often walked away rather than fight. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers noticed something remarkable. Most of these societies were surprisingly equal, not perfectly peaceful, not free from violence, but no one accumulated enormous wealth because wealth itself barely existed. You couldn't become rich when everything you owned had to travel with you. And this is the first clue. You cannot own another person if that person can simply disappear into the wilderness tomorrow. Imagine trying to keep someone as a slave when there are no fences, no prisons, no police, no roads, no armies, no farms tying people to one location. The moment you fall asleep, they leave. Ownership fails because freedom is only a long walk away. Mobility was the enemy of slavery. Everything changed when humans stopped following food and started growing it. Agriculture transformed history in ways that went far beyond producing bread. For the first time, food could be stored. Grain could fill enormous granaries. Fields represented months of labor. Villages became permanent. Then villages became cities. Once people settled down, something entirely new appeared. Property. Land could now belong to individuals. Harvest could be counted. Taxes could be collected. Food could be stolen. The more wealth accumulated, the greater the temptation to control not only resources, but the people producing them. This created a problem. A farm needed workers. A large estate needed even more. If labor created wealth, then controlling labor became one of the fastest ways to become powerful. For perhaps the first time in history, another human being became economically valuable, not as a friend, not as a family member, as labor, as an investment, as property. But agriculture alone wasn't enough. There were farming societies that never embraced slavery, and there were societies with no farming that still practiced it. One of the most fascinating examples comes from North America's Pacific Northwest. The Haida, the Tlingit, the Kwakwaka'wakw. These peoples never relied on agriculture. Instead, they lived in one of the richest natural environments on Earth. Salmon flooded the rivers every year. Forests provided game. The ocean supplied fish, seals, and whales. Nature itself produced an enormous surplus. Because food was abundant, people settled permanently. They accumulated wealth. Social classes emerged. Power became concentrated. And eventually, slavery appeared. Not because they farmed, because abundance created the same social conditions farming usually creates. This changes everything. Agriculture did not invent slavery. Surplus did. Whenever societies produced more resources than they immediately needed, Inequality became possible. Whenever inequality became large enough, some people gained enough power to control others. But even that wasn't enough. Something else had to happen first. Something psychological. Imagine capturing a stranger during war. Could you force them to work? Possibly. Could you sell their children? Could you treat them like livestock? Most people would hesitate, unless you first convinced yourself they weren't fully human. This may be the single most important invention behind slavery. Not chains, not markets, not laws. Dehumanization. Every civilization found its own version. Foreigners, enemies, people who spoke another language, people with another religion, another skin color, another tribe, another caste. The label changed. The mechanism stayed the same. First, make someone an outsider. Then convince yourself they deserve different rules. Once that mental barrier falls, almost anything becomes possible. This pattern appears astonishingly early. The oldest written records from ancient Mesopotamia already describe enslaved people using words that literally meant person from another land. The outsider became the easiest person to own, because once society stopped seeing someone as one of us, turning them into property became easier to justify, and this idea spread again and again and again, not because civilizations copied each other, but because they solved the same economic problem using the same psychological shortcut. Ownership required force. Force required justification. Dehumanization supplied that justification. From that moment onward, slavery stopped being an accident. It became an institution. It gained laws, contracts, markets, inheritance. Governments recorded slave sales. Courts settled ownership disputes. Children inherited enslaved people the same way they inherited land. A horrifying idea slowly transformed into ordinary administration. The truly frightening part is this: once something becomes paperwork, people stop questioning whether it should exist at all. By the time slavery appeared in written law, it had already become something far more dangerous than simple violence. It had become normal. That may be the most unsettling lesson in this entire story. People rarely wake up one morning and decide to create evil. Instead, they slowly build systems that make cruelty feel ordinary. Ancient Mesopotamia offers one of the earliest examples. Clay tablets from the cities of Ur and Uruk recorded slave sales, labor assignments, and ownership disputes with the same administrative language used for livestock and farmland. A person was no longer treated as a human being with rights. They became an asset, a line in an inventory, a number on a contract. Even more disturbing, war was not the only road into slavery. Debt often mattered even more. Imagine a farmer whose crops failed after months of drought. To feed his family, he borrowed grain. The next harvest failed too. He couldn't repay what he owed. Today, bankruptcy might cost someone their business. 4,000 years ago, it could cost them their freedom. Sometimes desperate parents pledged themselves as laborers. Sometimes they pledged their children. A single bad harvest could erase generations of independence. Rulers occasionally announced mass debt cancellations, not because they suddenly became compassionate, but because too many people were falling into bondage. If nearly everyone becomes a slave, eventually there is no one left to pay taxes or fight wars. Even kings understood that a society built entirely on debt slavery would eventually collapse under its own weight. As civilization expanded, slavery expanded with it. Every empire developed its own version. Different cultures, different languages, different religions. Yet the same underlying logic appeared again and again. In Egypt, slavery certainly existed, but one of history's most famous myths turns out to be wrong. The pyramids were almost certainly not built by massive armies of slaves. Archaeological discoveries near Giza revealed workers' villages complete with bakeries, breweries, medical care, and carefully prepared burials. These laborers were organized workers serving the state, not disposable property. But elsewhere in Egyptian society, prisoners of war, foreign captives, and debt servants still lived without freedom. The pyramids weren't built by slaves. That doesn't mean slavery wasn't there. It simply wore a different face. Across Asia, similar patterns emerged. During China's Shang dynasty, defeated enemies were transported hundreds of miles from their homes and forced into labor. Many remained captives for years before being sacrificed in royal ceremonies. They were valuable when they worked, disposable when they no longer served a purpose. In ancient India, legal texts eventually listed multiple categories of enslaved people. Some were prisoners of war, some were debtors. Others sold themselves during famine simply to survive. Freedom itself became something that could be exchanged for food. Perhaps nowhere was slavery defended more intellectually than in ancient Greece. The civilization remembered for democracy, philosophy, and scientific curiosity also produced one of history's most influential arguments for human inequality. Aristotle claimed that some people were slaves by nature. According to his reasoning, certain individuals supposedly lacked the capacity to govern themselves and therefore existed to serve others. It was a remarkable piece of philosophy, not because it was true, because it gave educated people permission to stop questioning slavery. Ideas can become chains just as effectively as iron. Rome inherited those ideas and expanded slavery to an unprecedented scale. The Roman Empire didn't merely use slaves, its economy depended on them. Huge agricultural estates relied almost entirely on forced labor. Mines consumed thousands of lives beneath the earth. Households, workshops, construction projects, and public infrastructure all rested on enslaved workers. For many wealthy Romans, owning hundreds of slaves was not unusual. Some owned thousands. Then came Spartacus. Originally trained as a gladiator, he escaped with a small group of fellow fighters. Within months, thousands of enslaved people joined him. Soon, that number reached tens of thousands. What began as an escape became a full-scale war against Rome itself. For 2 years, they defeated Roman armies again and again. Eventually, Rome crushed the rebellion. Its response revealed exactly how terrified the empire had become. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way. For miles, travelers passed an endless line of human bodies hanging beside the road. The message was unmistakable. Property must never believe it is human enough to demand freedom. Yet Rome was hardly unique. Across the Atlantic, civilizations that had never met Europeans independently created their own systems of bondage. Among the Aztecs, debt, crime, or famine could push someone into slavery. Children of slaves, however, were usually born free. The Maya developed hereditary slavery in some regions. The Inca required citizens to perform mandatory labor for the state, a system later transformed into brutal forced labor under Spanish colonial rule. Different rules, different structures, the same underlying principle: control labor, control society. Meanwhile, across Africa, many kingdoms had long practiced forms of captivity before Europeans arrived. War captives could become servants. Debtors could lose their freedom. Entire communities could become dependent after famine. European merchants did not invent slavery in Africa. What they did was something different and devastating. They transformed regional systems into a global commercial machine. Human beings became one of the world's most profitable exports. Entire economies reorganized around buying and selling people. The scale changed beyond anything seen before. The Atlantic slave trade transported roughly 12.5 million Africans across the ocean. Millions never survived the journey. Those who did entered plantation systems where every aspect of life was controlled: birth, marriage, work, punishment, even death. Ironically, the people treated as property often possessed knowledge their owners desperately needed. Many enslaved Africans brought sophisticated agricultural techniques developed over centuries. Rice cultivation in the American South depended heavily on expertise carried across the Atlantic by the very people being enslaved. Blacksmiths repaired tools, built equipment, and maintained entire plantations. The economy depended not only on their labor, but on their intelligence. That irony exposes one of slavery's greatest contradictions. Slave societies constantly claimed enslaved people were inferior, yet they relied on their skills to survive. The lie had to be repeated because reality kept proving the opposite. Then technology changed everything once again. Many inventions are celebrated for replacing human labor, but history often tells a different story. In 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. It processed cotton dramatically faster than before. Many assumed slavery would soon disappear because machines were taking over. The opposite happened. Cotton became vastly more profitable. Plantations expanded. Demand for enslaved labor exploded. One invention increased the value of slavery instead of reducing it. History repeatedly reminds us that technology is morally neutral. Whether it liberates people or exploits them depends entirely on the society using it. And beneath every economic explanation lies an even deeper question. How could ordinary people participate in systems like this without constant guilt? Modern neuroscience offers an unsettling clue. When researchers study how the brain responds to different social groups, they find something extraordinary. Normally, seeing another person's face activates regions associated with empathy and social understanding. But when individuals have been conditioned to view another group as less than human, those responses weaken dramatically. The brain begins processing them less like people and more like objects. That is the hidden engine behind every slave system in history. Before chains come stories. Before markets come labels. Before ownership comes the belief that someone else's suffering matters less than your own comfort. Once that belief takes hold, cruelty becomes easier. Not because people stop feeling, because they stop recognizing who deserves those feelings. This pattern never truly disappeared. Legal slavery has been abolished across almost every nation, but forced labor, human trafficking, debt bondage, and forced marriage continue to trap millions of people today. The names have changed. The mechanisms remain hauntingly familiar. Someone profits, someone holds power, someone convinces themselves the victim is somehow different. History repeats itself because the psychology never fully vanished. Which brings us to the real answer. Humans did not invent slavery in a single moment. No lone king created it. No single civilization introduced it to the world. Again and again, different societies independently arrived at the same terrible formula. First came surplus, something valuable enough to control. Then came hierarchy, enough power to prevent people from leaving. Finally came dehumanization, the belief that certain human beings no longer counted as fully human. Remove any one of those three elements, and slavery struggles to survive. Remove all three, and it cannot exist at all. That realization changes how we should think about history. The greatest danger was never chains. Chains are only the final step. The real danger begins much earlier. The moment one group starts believing another group is worth less. Because once that idea becomes ordinary, history has shown, time and again, how quickly human beings can begin treating other human beings as property. And that is why the most important question isn't how our ancestors invented slavery. It's whether we recognize the first signs before our own generation finds a new way to reinvent it.